Top 10 Gruesome Fairy Tale Origins. Fairy tales of the past were often full of macabre and gruesome twists and endings. These days, companies like Disney have sanitized them for a modern audience that is clearly deemed unable to cope. And so we see happy endings everywhere. This list looks at some of the common endings we are familiar with and explains the original gruesome origins. The Pied Piper. In the story of the Pied Piper, we have a town invaded with rodents. A man shows up wearing garments of pied and interwoven of hues and offers to free the town of the vermin. The locals consent to pay an immense entirety of cash if the flute player can do it, and he does. He plays music on his funnel which draws all the rats out of the town. At the point when he returns for installment, the townspeople won't hack up, so the Pied Piper chooses to free the town of kids as well. In most present-day variations, the flautist attracts the youngsters to a cavern out of the town, and when the townsfolk at long last consent to settle up, he sends them back. In the darker unique, the flute player drives the youngsters to a waterway where they all suffocate, aside from a faltering kid who couldn't keep up. Some cutting-edge researchers state that there are meanings of pedophilia in this fantasy. The rendition of this story that the greater part of us know about finishes with Riding Hood being spared by the woodsman who murders the evil wolf. In any case, indeed, the first French variant by Charles Perrault of the story was not exactly so pleasant. In this form, the young lady is a very much reproduced youngster who is given bogus guidelines by the wolf when she asks the path to her grandma's. Absurdly, Riding Hood accepts the exhortation of the wolf and winds up being eaten. What's more, here the story closes. There is no woodsman, no grandma, only a fat wolf and a dead Red Riding Hood. The good to this story is to not accept exhortation from outsiders. The Little Mermaid. The 1989 form of The Little Mermaid may be also called The Large Whopper. In the Disney form, the film closes with Ariel the mermaid being changed into a human so she can wed Eric. They wed in a great wedding went to by people and merpeople. Be that as it may, in the absolute first form by Hans Christian Andersen, the mermaid sees the prince wed a princess and she gives up. She is offered a blade with which to cut the ruler to death, yet rather than do that she bounces into the ocean and kicks the bucket by going to foam. Hans Christian Andersen adjusted the closure marginally to make it increasingly wonderful. In his new closure, rather than biting the dust when gone to foam, she turns into a little girl of the air, holding back to go to paradise. Along these lines, to be perfectly honest, she is still dead in every practical sense. Snow White. In the story of Snow White that we are for the most part acquainted with, the queen requests that a huntsman execute her and bring her heart back as verification. Rather, the huntsman can't force himself to do it and comes back with the core of a pig. Presently, luckily Disney hasn't harmed this story, however they left out one significant unique component. In the first story, the queen really requests Snow White's liver and lungs, which are to be served for supper that night. Additionally, in the first, Snow White awakens when she is bumped by the sovereign's pony as he conveys her back to his stronghold, not from an enchanted kiss. What the ruler needed to do with the dead young lady's body I will leave to your creative mind. Gracious, in the grim form, the story closes with the queen being compelled to move to death in super hot iron shoes. Sleeping Beauty. In the first resting magnificence, the stunning princess is taken care of when she pricks her finger on an axle. She rests for 100 years when a sovereign at last shows up, kisses her, and stirs her. They begin to look all starry-eyed at wed and, shock, live cheerfully ever after. Be that as it may, oh dear, the first story isn't so sweet indeed. You need to peruse this to trust it. In the first, the young lady is taken care of as a result of a prediction as opposed to a revile. Also, it isn't the kiss of a ruler which awakens her. The Lord, seeing her snoozing and rather liking having a peace, assaults her. Following 9 months, she brings forth 2 youngsters while she is still snoozing. One of the kids sucks her finger, which evacuates the bit of flax which was keeping her sleeping. She awakens to wind up assaulted and the mother of 2 children. Rumpelstiltskin. This reasonable story is somewhat not the same as the others on the grounds that instead of purifying the first, it was changed by the first creator to make it increasingly grim. In the first story, Rumpelstiltskin turns straw into gold for a little youngster who faces passing except if she can play out the accomplishment. Consequently, he requests her previously conceived kid. She concurs, yet when the day comes to hand over the child, she can't do it. Rumpelstiltskin reveals to her that he will let her off the deal in the event that she can figure his name. She catches him singing his name by a fire, thus she gets it accurately. Rumpelstiltskin, angry, flees gone forever. However, in the refreshed rendition, things are somewhat messier. Rumpelstiltskin is furious to such an extent that he drives his correct foot deep into the ground. He at that point snatches his left leg and tears himself down the middle. Obviously this slaughters him. Goldilocks and the 3 Bears. In this endearing story, we know about quite little Goldilocks, who finds the place of the 3 bears. She sneaks inside and eats their food, sits in their seats. Lastly, nods off on the bed of the most diminutive bear. At the point when the bears get back, they locate her sleeping. She stirs and escapes out the window in dread. The first story, which in reality just dates to 1837, has 2 potential varieties. In the main, the bears discover Goldilocks and tear her separated and eat her. In the second, Goldilocks is really an old witch who, like the purified form, leaps out of a window when the bears wake her up. The story closes by revealing to us that she either cushioned her neck in the fall, or was captured for vagrancy and sent to the place of correction. Hansel and Gretel. In the generally known adaptation of Hansel and Gretel, we know about 2 little youngsters who become lost in the woods. In the end, finding their way to a gingerbread house which has a place with a fiendish witch. The youngsters end up subjugated for a period as the witch sets them up for eating. They make sense of their way and toss the witch in a fire and departure. In a previous French rendition of this story called The Lost Children, rather than a witch we have a fallen angel. Presently the fiendish old villain is deceived by the youngsters, similarly as Hansel and Gretel. However, he works it out and assembles a sawhorse to put one of the kids on to drain. That isn't it? Mistake, he truly does. The youngsters profess not to realize how to jump on the sawhorse, so the fiend's better half illustrates. While she is resting, the children slice her throat and get away. The Girl Without Hands. In all honesty, the changed form of this fantasy is certifiably not significantly superior to the first. However, there are adequate contrasts to incorporate it here. In the new form, a helpless man is offered riches by the fiend in the event that he gives him whatever is remaining behind his plant. The helpless man thinks it is an apple tree and concurs, yet it is really his little girl. The fallen angel attempts to take the little girl, however can't, in light of the fact that she is unadulterated. So he takes steps to take the dad, except if the girl permits her dad to slash off her mind. She concurs and the dad carries out the thing. Presently, that isn't especially decent. However, it is marginally more terrible in a portion of the previous variations in which the little youngster cleaves off her own arms so as to make herself revolting to her sibling who is attempting to assault her. In another variation, the dad cleaves off the little girl's mind since she won't let him engage in sexual relations with her. Cinderella. In the advanced Cinderella fantasy we have the delightful Cinderella, deeply inspired by the ruler and her insidious advanced sisters wedding two masters, with everybody living joyfully ever after. The fantasy has its roots thinking back to the 1st century BC, where Strabo's champion was really called Rhodopis, not Cinderella. The story was fundamentally the same as the advanced one, except for the glass shoes and pumpkin mentor. Be that as it may, sneaking behind the pretty story is a progressively vile variety by the Grimm siblings. In this form, the dreadful advanced sisters cut off pieces of their own feet so as to fit them into the glass shoe, wanting to trick the sovereign. The sovereign is made aware of the dishonesty by two pigeons who peck out the progression sisters' eyes. They wind up spending the remainder of their lives as visually impaired poor people, while Cinderella gets the chance to sit around in extravagance at the sovereign's chateau.